Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Survivor 46 following episode 3, and this was obviously a pretty weird episode and not my favorite in my personal opinion. I feel like there was way too much focus on the Yanu tribe, and I feel like at this point it's getting kind of stale. Like, we kind of understand what's happening here, and I wish we would focus a bit more on the other tribes, but considering what happened here, I guess it makes sense why they did it that way. But we have 16 people to talk about, and let's waste any more time. Let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 16, we have the boot from this week, and here we have Randon, who was obviously medevaced, and I had a feeling this was coming by the end of it, where they had spent so much time setting at the Banu downfall with him giving up, and in the middle, they just had the random scene of showcasing Randon's injury before the challenge in a spot where it didn't even factor into the challenge, considering that Randon had sat out. And mixing that in with the fact that they cut the commercial 15 minutes before the episode ended just made it pretty clear that this was all misdirect leading up to Randon having to be pulled from the game. And I do feel bad for Randon. It obviously sucks to get medevaced. And he was obviously someone that was low on in the preseason. I felt like he was someone I was not seeing as a potential winner. Now, to be fair, he did play a bit better than expected, though even then, he wasn't in that great of a spot on his tribe where he didn't seem to click with most of the people there. And while he tried to work his way into the Hunters Heaven Alliance, he probably would have been in a bad spot even if they had gone to Tribal, where he would have been forced to lose Venus there. So I'm not saying he played a particularly great game, but at least he wasn't voted out, and at least he wasn't the first boot, so at least I'll give him that. But obviously he's now out of the game to where he is here, number 16. And before we continue, I am once again partnering up with Russell Muscle TV to promote Idle Plays. Idle Plays is an online shop where you can purchase Survivor puzzles and practice them. That way you can potentially be the next challenge beast on Survivor 47 and beyond. In this season, we have creator lockers. These are special bundles handpicked by myself and other Survivor YouTubers, along with creator trading cards. If you purchase my puzzle, you can get your hands on the Labyrinth Ball puzzle, the Slide puzzle, and Spencer's puzzle from Survivor Cambodia. If you want to take home these puzzles and more, feel free to use my link in the description or use my affiliate code, Survivor Gumball, and start prepping now. And with that, there are 15 players left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win the game based on their edit and current game position. But number 15, the person I believe is the least likely to win the game from this point, is still Liz. And again, I feel like Liz continues to get mostly middling content, where early on she is undermined, where she gets his confessional of underestimating Hunter, thinking he's just there for the adventure, only to immediately cut to Hunter saying that he's glad that people like Liz think that he's only there for the adventure. So I feel like that was a bad look. And even beyond that, the bulk of her content was pretty circumstantial, where she was sent on the journey and had to explain all that. So again, I feel like Liz is kind of an afterthought on the show, only there when absolutely necessary, and even then is kind of shown in a bad light. I feel like the show isn't really propping her up to where she is here at number 15. Now moving on to number 14, we have someone who got a massive edit in this episode, and here we have Banu. And obviously this episode was all about Banu, with him having this little arc of him like giving up and him trying to scrape his way out the bottom, only for bad things to happen to him over and over again. Like the fact that he talks about you gotta know when to hold them and know when to fold them, except he doesn't know the full phrase there. He also gets to go on the journey, and he actually didn't want to play in the game at first, as his whole plan was to use his shot in the dark, only for him to not get his way there, and then he kind of just crumbles in the middle of the challenge to where he ends up losing his vote and is unable to use his shot in the dark. And really, a lot of it just felt like kind of a hopeless situation, really like trying to make you think that he was going out, until the random situation kind of swooped in and gave him a miracle. But even then, he's still at the bottom of his tribe, and I have a strong sense that he'll be voted out if they go back to tribal again. So in a lot of ways, I feel like Banu is probably not winning. I feel like this episode as a whole was probably not a good look for him long term, and even with his potential to rebound in the game, I feel like the fact that he got so much content in this episode just makes me think that his whole arc of him being on the bottom is just a temporary thing, trying to use Banu as much as they can while he's there before he's eventually taken out. So I don't really have much faith in him to win the game from this point on, to where he is here at number 14. Now moving on to number 13, we have someone who pretty much got no content in this episode, but we do have Tim Spicer. And again, he was pretty much invisible here, didn't really have anything to do. and I feel like there wasn't really anything to bog him down, but at the same time, there's nothing really to prop him up. And considering that I already had him low in last week's ranking, I feel like I can't really have him any higher than number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and admittedly, this person went down more so because other people moved up. But I do have Mariah here, and Mariah did get a confessional here where she gets pretty generic content about people going on an idol hunt and how you're half idol hunting, half looking at people's pockets to see if there's stuff in them. But really beyond that, I feel like Mariah is just kind of just there on the show, not really doing much. But really, there wasn't anything bad about her content in this episode. I feel like I just kind of went up on other people, if I'm being perfectly honest. But at the same time, I feel like Mariah is probably not winning at this point, to where I have her here at number 12. Now moving on to number 11, and we have another person who kind of went down, not so much because of what we saw from them this episode, but more so because of where I think they're going in the game. But we do have Soda here. And the main reason I have Soda this low is I think there is a lot of danger for her coming into these next couple of rounds, where Randon talked quite a bit in his exit interview about how he actually wanted to target Soda if they had a chance to go to Tribal early on. And you would assume that Venus would have a similar thought, considering that she did talk pretty negatively about Soda last episode. And Soda herself got kind of negative content with her like being shown grabbing the idol and stuff. And the fact that Soda herself doesn't get any content in this episode is probably a bad sign for her in that regard. And I feel like with this being a better episode for Venus, it does make me think that Venus could start to have this turnaround, which I'll be talking about more when I get to Venus. But I do worry that if Venus does have this resurgence on her tribe and they go to Tribal soon, that Soda will be in a lot of danger there. Now, yes, she did talk more about Hunter being a potential target, but realistically, I don't think the votes will be there to take out Hunter. I feel like if they go to Tribal, Soda's a much more viable target there, or possibly a Liz. So I don't think it's leading to a Hunter boot. I do worry quite a bit for Soda in that regard. And with Soda not really getting much content here, it does make me worry that she'll be this big target for down the road, to where I have her here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and we have someone who has moved up slightly, though at the same time I'm still very conflicted about their edit, and we do have Q. And Q is someone that I have struggled with when it comes to where to put them on this power ranking, as even though they seem to be set to be a major character across the season, and even though they seem primed to make the merge at this point, I also don't like a lot of their content on the show, where we have been getting the setup to a Q and Kenzie rivalry that hasn't really panned out up to this point. And obviously he tried to coach up Banu to try to get him to not give up, though considering the state of things with Banu not having a vote the next time to go to Tribal, it's going to be kind of hard for Q to be able to do that. But obviously we also saw in this episode him getting this really ridiculous content of him feeling bad about losing the challenge and him wanting people to vote him out, even though that wasn't really much of a thing. And we even have Tiffany grilling him for this. I do think he recovers all right, where he does explain like his story, talked about how he once cost his team the game in high school. I do think that was somewhat positive content for him. But beyond that, I feel like Q is largely just another big player, someone who's probably going to have some longevity on the season, someone who probably will have an impact on the game, and someone who has gotten bits of positivity where he has gotten to explain his point of view at points. But I do think he has enough questionable content, and I feel like with other people being higher on my power ranking, I do have to leave him here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we have someone who is remaining around the same spot as last week, but we do have Kenzie. And I think at this point, Kenzie reminds me a lot of Ellie from Survivor 43, where she is being set up as this big player on her starting tribe, but someone who is already being pegged as a threat, and someone who is already being set up as having this rivalry with certain people, with people like Q, for instance. And obviously Banu was talking negatively about her, where obviously Banu ends up spilling the beans that she's been running the tribe to the other people on the journey, and we see the other tribes getting this information as well, to where now everyone in the game knows that Kenzie is running the Yanu tribe. So I feel like from a gain standpoint, that obviously puts Kenzie in a bad spot. Reminds me a lot of Ellie from 43, and I feel like she has a similar trajectory to Ellie at this point, where we're getting the setup to people like Hugh wanting to turn on her, but not really having the ability to do so right now. To her straight up, I feel like if Yanu goes to Tribal relatively soon, that they'll just bite the bullet and take out Banu. But come the merge, you'll have all these people willing to take the shot against Kenzie, and it'll probably hit at that point. So I do feel like that's Kenzie's trajectory in the game. And even beyond that, she's kind of been getting middling content where she's kind of been like dunking on the other people on her tribe, where she calls Banu like this nice guy that doesn't have a strategic bone in his body. You also have her calling out Q for being a martyr. And at the same time, you have Banu calling her a mermaid dragon. So there's not a lot of good stuff coming from Kenzie. And I feel like she's probably primed to be taken out around the early merge, to where I have her here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we have someone who has dropped a little bit. I'm still not entirely sure what to do with this person, but we do have Ben. And Ben's content here was mostly circumstantial, where obviously he goes on the journey, he ends up losing the challenge and losing his vote in the process. And while we get some strategic content from him where he talks about like wanting to reveal some information, but not reveal the fact that he doesn't have a vote, instead coming up with this thing about how he'll have the opportunity for the advantage in the future. Again, that is something at least, but beyond that, I'm not getting the sense that Ben's a top contender at this point, and with him getting mostly circumstantial content, I do have him here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, we have someone who has gone up quite a bit since last week, but we do have Venus. And Venus was someone who, again, I've been kind of back and forth on, as even though I didn't doubt that she would be this big character during this early season, I wasn't sure if it would translate to any longevity. But I do feel like this episode was pretty good for her, where she does get the setup to kind of avenging Randon, where she's the only one to talk about Randon after he gets medevac, talking about how she's all alone, which to me feels like setup to her potentially gaining some power within the game. And with the way the tribes are breaking down at this point, there's a chance that she could work her way into the majority at this point by working with the likes of Hunter and Tevin. Now, yes, she does get a confessional talking about how she sees right through Hunter, and that Hunter thinks he's a good person, but knows that he's a big threat and that he has Tevin on lock. But I think when it comes down to it, I'm not entirely sure if she'll actually target Hunter by the time they go to Tribal, as I feel like there are definitely other targets that she has thrown out there, people like Soda, for instance. So again, it is kind of an interesting turning point for Venus's game, and I feel like it'll be for the positive, to where she could have this bigger arc across the season where she grows as a player, but still not to the point where I think she's winning, where either way, even if she is able to get some traction in the game, I don't think it's going to lead to a win by the end of it, where there's already so much negativity surrounding her, and there's definitely this potential for her to have this growth arc during the season, or maybe just approach the game the way that she's already talked about, to where it may not be a game that people will want to reward with at the end. So again, I'm still conflicted about whether she'll actually win by the end, but I do feel like this episode was a sign that she could have some longevity on the season, to where I have her here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, we have someone who I remain largely the same on compared to last week, but we do have Gem. And Gem obviously gets a bit of circumstantial content where she ends up finding the Beware advantage on her tribe, and even then it's through a flashback, which I do find a bit weird. But again, it's still decent enough. We do know where she is in the game. I also find it interesting how when she is reading the instructions, that she's the first one to note that if her tribe never loses immunity, that there'll be further instructions at that point, which to me indicates that there is a chance that her tribe just never goes to tribal in the pre-merge, which obviously is good for her longevity wise. But Gem is someone who I remain largely the same around. I don't think there was anything to really knock her down, and considering I had her relatively high last week, I still have her here around number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and we again have someone remaining around the same spot as last week, but we do have Tiffany. And again, I think Tiffany's in a pretty solid spot on her tribe. While they keep losing challenges, I think it's pretty clear that she's probably in the best position on that tribe right now, where she has the best relationship with both Q and Kenzie, to where she'll probably be the swing vote the next time they go to tribal. And I think with her getting a consistent presence on the show, I do think she has a decent amount of longevity on the season. But I still think my fundamental view of her hasn't changed, to where, kind of like Q, she just comes off as this big player, someone who will definitely have a lot of influence on the season, but someone who will come up short just by the end of it, maybe being taken around the mid-merge. So again, I don't think anything in this episode really changed my opinion on Tiffany, aside from her just continuing to get the same type of content she got before, which leaves her around the same spot at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and this person has dropped a bit from last week, but we do have Charlie. And Charlie got a pretty weird edit in this episode, where he kind of gets dunked on in a similar light to how Hunter got dunked on in episode 2, where we literally show him in confessional saying that he wants to find the idol and that he doesn't want others to know about it, only for Jem to find it in front of him and him not noticing that Jem had found it. Again, kind of undermining him there, which is obviously a bad sign for him edit-wise, to where I did decide to drop him. Now, I still think he'll be like relatively high on the rankings considering just how few people actually moved up in my personal opinion, but I do think it was a bad enough sign for him to where I did have to drop him to number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we have someone remaining around the same spot as they were last week as well, but we do have Hunter. And Hunter got such a strange edit in this episode, where on one hand, he got personal content in this episode. He gets his intro package, talking about how like he got into teaching and that he builds challenges in his backyard and that he's been wanting people to underestimate him and people to think that he's just there for the adventure and to be a provider. And all that is pretty good. But on the other hand, you also have Venus, who actively calls him out in this episode, where she claims that she can see right through him and that she knows that he has Tevin on lock and that she wants to target him. And again, it is kind of questionable, like why they showed that in particular. And I'm not entirely sure what to make of that at this point. Where even though I have argued that I don't think Venus will actually target Hunter if they go to tribal relatively soon, the fact that they're already showing Hunter as being a bit of a threat could come back to bite him later on. So I am very much conflicted over whether Hunter will actually win by the end of it. But again, considering the rest of the field, considering that there are other people that have bigger holes in their edit and people that don't have as much positives compared to Hunter, I am going to leave him here around number 3, even though I am kind of conflicted on where he stands at this point. Now moving on to number 2, and I am actually a little surprised I had this person this high at this point, but number 2, we do have Tevin. And Tevin has had a bit of a cool down these last couple weeks where he didn't have that much in episode 2. In episode 3, he was completely silent, kind of like a lot of the other contenders here, and including my number 1 person. So again, I'm not entirely sure what to make of that. However, I will say that his silence actually kind of counters what I said about him in week 1, where obviously he came off as a big character there. So the fact that he is getting a bit of a cool down could be a positive sign for him in the sense that they don't want to overexpose him during a lot of the pre-merge, especially when he doesn't have to be shown, and considering how they wanted to use this episode as a way of propping up Banu. So again, him not getting that much content here isn't the worst thing in the world, though we'll have to see where he stands next week. But again, I am questioning whether he'll actually stay at this number 2 spot for too much longer. But for now, considering just how weird this episode was, I am going to have him here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Survivor 46 at this point is still Maria. Now, obviously, Maria got no content this episode, which isn't great. But again, I kind of excused it by noting how weird this episode was in general, with them focusing so much on Banu and obviously trying to have this misdirect and Brandon getting medevac. So Maria not getting that much content here isn't that bad, though obviously what happens next week will factor a lot into where she places moving forward. But considering the rest of the field, considering that there are so many people now that have holes in their edit, Maria included with her completely silent episode 3, I don't think there's enough here to really lower Maria in my power ranking. I think she still has the cleanest edit at this point, considering her first 2 episodes were pretty strong, and it's for that reason that I still have her here at number 1. And there we go, that'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really helps with the channel. Now I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so you can look forward to that. I am covering a whole bunch of shows at this point, including Big Brother Canada and The Amazing Race 36, so you can expect weekly power rankings of those shows. I'm on Patreon, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description, and you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.